Thank you, everybody, for coming to the College Football Betting with Aaron Torres YouTube channel. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. Go ahead, click that subscribe button. It helps our channel grow. It helps our audience grow. I appreciate it more than you know, as we're talking college football on this channel year-round. Appreciate your support. Click that subscribe button. I want to go ahead and rip through another one of our over-under win total pods. We've gone through most of the big programs at this point: Bama, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, on and on. More recently, we've done Miami, Florida State out of the ACC. If you've missed any of them, make sure to go back and download them. They're short, probably about 12, 15 minutes each, just trying to pack the content as much as we can. You can get it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And today we're staying in the ACC. And we're going to the Clemson Tigers. Clemson, a very interesting program because they're coming off a 9-win season. Normally that's good. But this is the first time since the 2010 season that Dabo Swinney's team did not reach at least 10 wins. And this year, I think the over-under reflects that Vegas is finally starting to give up on Dabo turning this thing around. The over-under is set at 8.5. That's lower than Miami. That's lower than Florida State. Now, the good news is that the money is coming in on the over of 8.5. So let's go ahead and dive into the Clemson Tigers. When it comes to Clemson, let's start with last year. And bottom line, listen, I don't think there's any nice way to put it. The first week of the season was jarring. Remember, last year they played that Monday night Labor Day game at Duke. Mike Elko was still at Duke at the time. They get smoked. Now, granted, they turn the ball over a bunch, whatever. But the thing that I go back to that night, I've referenced it a million times on the Aaron Torres pod. If you watch that game, Tom Luganville was doing sidelines, and he said, guys, I got to be honest. The size, speed, athleticism of the Duke players really isn't all that different from Clemson, and that's a terrifying team, a terrifying thing for Clemson. Given, of course, Dabo Swinney's been stubborn about some of his recruiting practices, about the portal, all of that good stuff. So that was how the season started. They do bounce back with 2 wins after that. Then they play Florida State at home and end up losing that game. Now, to their credit, it was back and forth. There was a strip and score that flipped the game. Clemson could have won that game, but they lose to Florida State by the halfway, or the 2/3 of the way point of the season. They're 4-4 overall, completely out of everything from not just the national championship ACC title race, but they were tumbling down the top 25, all of that. To their credit, they did finish the season strong. If you remember, Notre Dame came into Clemson playing pretty good football. They beat Clemson, or they beat Notre Dame at home. They beat UNC when UNC was ranked. They beat South Carolina, their rival, finished 9-4. And now we roll into this season where there is a lot of pressure. But I'll also say this, if you really break it down, there should be some reason for excitement. Part of that excitement, year 2 of the Garrett Riley offense at Clemson. Remember, a year ago, Garrett Riley was as hot of a name in the assistant coach community as there was. He had been the offensive coordinator when TCU played for a national championship. He comes to Clemson, and bluntly, it just doesn't click. Now, for Clemson to have success this year, part of it does come down to Cade Klubnik just needs to be better. And I don't think it's all on Cade Klubnik, and we're going to get to all of that in a minute. But this was a kid who completed just 64% of his passes, 2,800 yards, 19 TDs, 9 interceptions, and that's just not going to get it done in high-level college football. Clemson, to its credit, had a pretty solid run game with Phil Maffa, who does return after rushing for just under 1,000 yards and 13 TDs a season ago. Will Shipley has gone from the backfield, but the O-line has to be better, and we'll see if the receiver room is better, because part of the Cade Klubnik thing, if you watch the games, it didn't feel like he had a lot of guys in that receiver room that could separate, and the O-line simply didn't do a good enough job blocking. Now, in terms of the receiver room, it should be better this year. Tyler Brown back, 52 catches. Troy Stellato back, 38 catches. Jake Brenningstool, the tight end, is back, 50 catches, second most on the team. And 2 highly touted receivers coming in the recruiting class. TJ Parker was not TJ Parker. I apologize there. TJ Moore is the 5-star that's coming in at the wide receiver position. Bryant Wesco, another 5-star coming in from Texas. Both those guys are highly touted. You talk to people who cover recruiting, they love both of those players. So the receiver room should be improved. You have Phil Maffa. Do think ultimately it does come down to the O-line. The positives, 3 starters do return on the O-line. The negatives, they were 65th in the country in sacks allowed. They allowed 29 sacks in 13 games. Also, in terms of yards per carry, in terms of blowing people off the ball, 65th in the country, middle of the pack. But that's not going to get the job done at Clemson. So we'll see if the offensive line improves. We'll see if Cade Klubnik improves. But also, we got to see if this defense can stay at the level that it is. Credit to the defense, even in the post-Brent Venables world. That defense was very good last year, top 10 in total defense, and they returned dudes at all 3 levels. I know I just referenced TJ Parker as a wide receiver. He's actually the returning edge player who was a freshman All-American a season ago. 12.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks as a true freshman a season ago. And Peter Woods is back as well. He was a 5-star who played well, 2.5 TFLs last season. But in comparison to TJ Parker, it doesn't look quite as impressive. But both those guys are building block defensive linemen. Linebacker is kind of where it gets interesting. Jeremiah Trotter's out. That's the negative. Barrett Carter is an All-American. And Barrett Carter could have gone pro. Barrett Carter decides to return. And he is going to be one of the best linebackers in college football. 67 tackles, 9.5 sacks, 9.5 TFLs, 3.5 sacks. Sammy Brown, another 5-star, should get some reps at linebacker. He is a future star. And then the secondary is pretty solid. RJ Mickens is back, ton of experience there. Khalil Barnes was kind of a breakout player a year ago. And so that defense should again be among the best in college football. Now let's talk schedule. Schedule is certainly interesting. And I mean, if you want kind of a statement on maybe where Clemson is as a program, you just got to go to week 1. Week 1, they open against Georgia. It's worth noting, by the way, just the fact that that is a noon Eastern kickoff, that says to me that the TV people do not expect that game to be competitive, or they'd be putting it in prime time or whatever. And Vegas doesn't feel like it's going to be competitive either. Clemson is a 13.5-point underdog against the Georgia Bulldogs. By the way, the over-under set for 48.5, meaning that they think it's going to be low scoring. They think Clemson's going to struggle to move the ball, and they think it is going to get ugly. If you're looking for a positive, yeah, Georgia's the preseason national championship favorite. After that, though, the schedule is manageable. You get your next 3 at home, App State, NC State, who you did lose to last year, but this one's at home, and Stanford. Remember, that is now an ACC game before you have the big one against Florida State to start October. So it'll be interesting. You get probably your 2 biggest games in your first 5, the first half of the season. And much like last year, we're going to know by about mid-October, is this team a true contender or not? But of course, the good news is that with the 12-team playoff, it doesn't really matter if you lose 2, especially when one of them is out of conference. So that's the good news. The even better news, back half of the schedule is actually very manageable. 4 of your last 6 are at home. You do not play Miami, who is a pretty good football team this year. I think they might be the most talented team in the ACC. You get Louisville at home. You get your rival South Carolina home as well. Notre Dame obviously is not in the ACC for football, but there's so many games on Notre Dame's schedule. You don't have to play them, so that's a positive as well. And so when you look at Clemson, over under of 8.5, let me start with the positive. I think they're going to go over because ultimately I look at this team. Georgia could get ugly. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to try to make things, pretend like it's going to be all rainbows and sunshine for Clemson fans. You got to go to Florida State. But even if you lose to Florida State, remember, there are no divisions. You just have to get into that conference championship game. Conference championship games in Charlotte, not far from where you play. And if you can get into that conference championship game, you'll have home field advantage. And if you win, you'll make the playoff. So that's the good news. The even better news is the schedule is pretty manageable once you get past Florida State the first week of October. Virginia Tech, a lot of people think is a solid program. You do have to play them late. But as I said, no Miami, South Carolina at home, Louisville at home. So I lean over, and I think the big picture is this. So much does rely on the offensive line. So much does rely on Cade Klubnik. But when I look at this team, two things stand out. One, I have to think that Cade Klubnik in year 2 in this system is going to be better. I just have to believe it. Cade Klubnik had too much hype. He looked too good in that ACC championship game 2 years ago. I just refuse to believe that he isn't a better football player than he showed last year. The other thing worth noting, yes, they got smoked by Duke on opening night. Their 3 other losses, though, Florida State by a touchdown, Miami by 8 in double overtime, and NC State by a touchdown on the road. So 3 of your 4 losses were on the road. You're going to play road games this year, obviously. But 3 of the 4 losses were by a touchdown or less, 2 in overtime. And so I look at this team. I'm not saying that they're perfect, but they ended on a 5-game win streak. And I got to believe that this team will be better. I like the over of 8.5. If it was 9.5, I'd probably stay away. But 8.5, I do like. And I think there's a chance that they make the college football playoff as the ACC champion. Now, at the same time, I'll add Dabo. We're not going to talk portal here. This isn't the place to do it. But where I would be concerned if I was a Clemson fan is the depth. I think they can get to the playoff. I don't know what they can do once they get there, but this is an over-under win total pod, so you don't have to worry about that. I actually like the over of 8.5 with Clemson. That is actually one of my favorite bets for the 2024 season. All right. I think that's it for this episode of College Football Betting. If you're not subscribed, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music. Also, make sure to leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And if you want to go to YouTube, we would love your support there. That's all for today's show. We'll be back soon. More college football betting. By the way, if you've missed any of the other episodes, make sure to go ahead and check them out. They're all available on Apple and Spotify. Also available on YouTube. Subscribe to that YouTube channel. We will be back with another episode of College Football Betting.